well, that's into today's second video. We're going to have a look at the spring of 2015. For this video, it's the first spring update. Going to give us several long-range seasonal models to see what they're showing maybe going to happen for the spring of 2015. Haven't got all the models for this video. Some of them don't quite extend out to the time frame yet. We've not got the Japanese, we've not got the Russian. They'll be coming on stream as we go through to the second update next month, but we've got enough to be getting on with anyway for today's video. Now, before I get on with that, just to say about the ads, there's links to articles sitting on most of the pages at GazWebBiz.com. I have a browse through those widgets. Any articles that you're interested in, just click through, and there's yellow weather related contextual ads on most of the pages as well, so have a browse through those and see what they're about. Thanks so much for doing that. Okay, let's get on with the spring update. We're going to start off with the 500 millibar height anomaly from Brazil. First of all, always a little bit different with this because red is extrapolated to low pressure and blue is extrapolated to high pressure. Usually on height anomaly chart would be the other way round. So the Brazilian model, British Arctic just there, is seeing that got a trough of low pressure sitting just to the west and the southwest of the country as an anomalous trough for February to April. This doesn't quite cover the whole spring period either, but for February to April the anomaly has a trough of low pressure sitting to the southwest of the country. As we go through to the temperature anomaly, it's coming out a little bit warmer than average on the milder side of average. Probably not a surprise because with low pressure down to the southwest, we'd probably be bringing up a fair amount of southerly winds. And the rainfall anomaly is coming out average to wetter than average down to the south of the country. Very wet spring or February to April period being signalled across western parts of France into the Bay of Biscay. That would undoubtedly be bringing us some wet weather at times up from the south and southwest. So quite an unsettled and relatively mild February to April update from the Brazilian model. I did a video earlier today covering the late winter period from January to March. This is going on a bit further from February to April. It's seeing quite a mild, wet sort of early spring type period. Next month, the Brazilian model will have the full spring period from March through to May, and the rest of the models you're going to see now cover the full spring period as well. So UK Met Office model next, and we're seeing a little bit of a different pattern here for the spring from the UK Met. Actually, it has a ridge of high pressure down to the southwest rather than the low pressure the Brazilian model is seeing. It's placing a trough somewhere across central parts of Europe, interestingly. This is the mean sea level pressure anomaly. So what's going on there is probably with high pressure down to southwest extending through something like that. So probably under relatively high pressure there, or near null pressure anyway. Low pressure down to central parts of Europe to the southeast of that high pressure, and also low pressure up here. What it probably means, it's an unusual anomaly, but what it probably means, I would suspect, with low pressure sitting just to the east, is that we would tend to be maybe bringing in some easterly influences there through the course of the spring. Of course, once you get on to April and May, you expect easterlies. If you get easterlies in March, those do have the potential to be cold, but relatively dry, and I would suggest, well, not a particularly warm spring being predicted there by the UK Met. The precipitation anomaly from UK Met for the spring is coming out near normal. Notice how wet it is though across central parts of Europe. That's where we've got that trough of low pressure. It's across central Europe. For us, it's coming out near normal to maybe borderline, a little bit wetter than average, but certainly not a wet signal being predicted there from the Brazilian model. The temperature anomaly is coming out ever slightly above average, a little bit above average, but not a desperately warm spring being predicted there by any means, and I would suggest it's a little bit on the drier side probably than we've been used to as well. So quite an unusual one that from UK Met, but I think it is seeing a fairly significant change to the weather pattern as we get through to the spring. Huub van der Doel next. These are analog based forecasts who takes the sea surface temperature anomalies across the world in any given month and then creates an analog based forecast on those sea surface temperature anomalies. He's been going for a cold winter, of course, as we know through all of his updates over the last few months. Cold winter's been very much signalled with lots of northern blocking. For the spring, what Hugues Van der Doel is seeing in terms of the 500 millimeter height anomaly is that the high pressure actually starts to become centred around the UK and going off up to the northeast up there as well. But high pressure really starting to build in over the top of the country through the course of the spring. So that means the temperature anomaly is coming out a little bit warmer than average for the spring, with high pressure fairly dominant. The temperature anomaly comes out a little bit milder than average. Still quite a cold spring for most central eastern parts of Europe and backing into Russia, but the cold is receding through the spring compared to the winter as those warmer temperature anomalies begin to appear in the west of Europe. And the precipitation anomaly is coming out drier than average, so a relatively nice spring being signalled there, milder and drier than average, with high pressure centred more or less over top of the UK, to be honest. So UK Met and Hugues Van der Doel, who works within the umbrella of NOAA in the United States, both the UK Met and Hugues Van der Doel seeing perhaps quite a high pressure anticyclonic dominated spring. They may differ a little bit about the temperatures. I think the UK Met is perhaps a bit cooler than Hugues Van der Doel, but a fairly dry spring being signalled overall. CFS V2 next, again another product for the United States. This one is the 700 millimeter height anomaly for the spring, March to May, and we're seeing a trough of below average heights sitting to the north of the country, just north of Scotland, a ridge in the central part of the Atlantic, and the jet stream is running through something like that. So that's quite an unsettled spring there, being signalled there, I think, from CFS V2. Temperature anomaly coming out near normal, as it is for virtually the whole of Europe, so not a particularly warm spring being signalled, but also not a particularly cold spring. And the CFS V2, this sort of range does have this tendency to just plaster everything in white, and it's very unlikely that the whole of Europe is going to be seeing temperature anomalies coming out around average, so I don't think the model really has a strong signal yet. In terms of a rainfall anomaly, well, it's near normal for the British Isles, but most of Central and Western Europe actually coming out a little bit wetter than average. That's with running the jet stream through, of course, with a trough of low pressure to the north of Scotland, so it could be a relatively unsettled spring. So a bit of a disagreement there between Hugues Van der Doel and the NOAA models of CFS V2. This is how the anomalies break down in terms of monthly periods. This 700 millimeter height anomaly for March. You just saw this, of course, on the 3 monthly update for late winter update. For March, we see this trough of low pressure to the western country, a ridge down to the south, and the jet stream is coming through. So that's a relatively mild and unsettled looking signal for March. For April, a little bit different. I think could be a colder month for April, because the trough of low pressure is centred more towards the northeast of the country, towards Scandinavia. The ridge is in the central part of the Atlantic, so the jet stream with baddies coming through something like that. So probably on the cold side of the jet for April. Could be wettest in the north, driest in the west, but also probably quite cold northwesterly winds coming through at times, so there is wintry potential with that, certain potential for some late season frost. And as we go through to May, of course very speculative by this point, but the anomaly for May showed that the trough of low pressure is over Scandinavia, then the ridge is down to the southwest again, and the jet stream again coming through something like that. So that's a relatively disappointing spring really being shown up by the CFS V2. I think March is probably mild, but April and May were on the cool side of the jet, and probably bringing winds generally from a northwesterly direction, so pretty disappointing April and May there. NASA next. This is the experimental model from NASA, and this one is 500 millimeter heights, and very similar signal really. We're seeing a trough of low pressure to the north of Scotland. The ridge is out in the central part of the Atlantic, so the jet stream is probably doing something like that, so coming through the country, maybe even a little bit to the south, and on a northwest to southeast type trajectory, and he said direct trajectory there, on a northwest to southeast trajectory. So the temperature anomaly for the spring, there we are over here, is coming out near normal to a little bit cooler, a relatively cool spring being signalled there. But there's a pattern emerging here for a cooler spring that would be used, a cooler season that would be used for some time. Temperature anomaly is coming out average to a little bit maybe below. The rainfall anomaly comes out a little bit above average for the north, elsewhere near normal, and the reason, of course, coming out a little bit above average Scotland, so there's a trough of low pressure sitting just to the north of the country. Beijing Climate Centre, these are 500 millibar heights from the BCC, and we see we've got a ridge of high pressure out in the central part of the Atlantic. The trough of low pressure is to the north, across the north of Scotland. Jet stream is doing something like that. With this one, we're probably on the mild side of the jet. The way the trough and the ridge are aligning probably leaves us on the warmer side of the jet. You saw on the 3 monthly update for January to March, the Beijing Climate Centre has shifted a bit for the late winter period and gone quite mild. It's still doing that for the spring, so we're on the warm side of the jet. We've got a ridge out to west, so that's quite a nice pattern actually for the spring. The temperature anomaly, having said that, is coming out a little bit below average. Well, near normal really, but a little bit below across parts of the country. But it's a complicated one, and I think overall, with the way that's aligned, we are more or less on the warm side of the jet. So if bad anomaly did come out, I would expect us to be a little bit warmer than average. But on the actual model anomaly chart, yeah, we're coming out near normal to maybe even a little bit below. The rainfall anomaly is coming out drier than average. It's not surprised we've got a ridge just sitting to the west of the country, so you'd expect rainfall to be a little bit drier than average. And then finally going through to the Jamstec IOD, look at this, a very, very cold spring being signalled there for not just British Isles but most of Central and Western Europe. Really cold with temperatures way below average. Would be a very delayed spring indeed, very cold across most of the United States as well. The reason for that is quite clearly shown up on the precipitation anomaly, and by the way, this is the last model, not sure if I mentioned that, but this is the last model we're looking at for this update. We've got the ridge there sitting around Iceland, so it's drier than average around Iceland, above average heights there. Trough around British Isles and into central parts of Europe, so the jet stream, or I should say the wind flow, is coming something like that from the east and northeast, as the jet stream is going something like that. There's a trough across central parts of Europe, and it places us on the cold side of the jet basically, and it also brings in those cold northeasterly winds. So the Jamstec is definitely going for a colder than average spring. Now, there is a flaw from the Jamstec model. I've spoken about this before. At an extended range, the Jamstec is colder, but it ends up most of the time. And then as you get closer and closer, it sort of moderates that cold down. So what I would suspect for next month's update is that those cold anomalies will be moderated, probably quite significantly, and many areas in that cold sort of anomaly that we're just looking at probably going a little bit warmer than average. It'll be interesting to see how it plays out next month. If it does pick up on a cold season, of course, it may carry on throughout all of the updates. So let's see where it goes next month. But I think there's definitely that flaw within the Jamstec IOD, but it starts off quite cold, and then it sort of moderates things as it goes along. But that's it, and I think overall the trend from this update, and we have got all the models on stream, that's the big caveat, but overall I think the trend is for a relatively cool spring. There's no real signal on most of these models for anything desperately warm. The Brazilian model is probably the warmest because where it places the trough down to the southwest, we bring a fair amount of southerly winds. But overall, I think from this update, relatively cool season being predicted at the moment from these models. Not the extreme cold of the Jamstec, but relatively cool overall. No real signal there for rainfall, but I think probably edging on the drier side of things, to be honest, although that's a very difficult one. But probably edging towards the drier things and a relatively cool, dry side of things, and a relatively cool season on this first update for spring. We'll have another look at it next month when we'll have the JMA, and we'll also have the Russian model, and then of course as you know, the routine now, we get to February and we'll have the final update, and that will have some analogues as well from our lovely friend Stuart Markham. He sent me over some interesting analogues for the spring. We'll be looking at those for the final update, which will encompass the GazWeatherViz spring forecast. So that's it for now. I hope you found both the long range updates today interesting and informative. That's all for now, and thanks for watching.